Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Enhancing Program Success and Sustainability for Women in the Justice System, Targeting System Change Strategies. My name is Allison Upton. I'm a project manager at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I will be moderating today's webinar, which is hosted in coordination with the Bureau of Justice Assistance. To give you an overview of today's webinar, first we will do introductions of our panelists. Then we'll walk through strategies to maximize system change when working with women in the justice system. Next, we'll hear from representatives from the Franklin County, Ohio Office of Justice Policy and Programs and Sheriff's Office, who will share a lot of details of how they've implemented systems change for women in their programs and facilities. And towards the end of the training, we'll have time for questions and answers. So I'd like to move to introductions of our panelists, and first I do want to mention that unfortunately Maria Fryer, who is a policy advisor at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, is unable to join us unexpectedly today, but I do want to thank her for her support of this training, and hopefully she will be able to be on the next training. Our other panelists, first I'd like to introduce Becki Ney, who is a principal of the Center for Effective Public Policy, where she has worked since 1982. She currently serves as the project director of the National Resource Center on Justice-Involved Women, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, in partnership with the National Institute of Corrections. In addition, Becki serves as a technical assistance provider for BJA's Maximizing JRI State Reforms and NIC's Evidence-Based Decision-Making Initiative. She also provides assistance to state paroling authorities receiving assistance from BJA's National Parole Resource Center. Throughout her career, Becki has been involved in numerous state and local efforts with an emphasis on strengthening criminal justice collaboration and building effective partnerships, community corrections, jail and prison overcrowding and population management, parole release decision-making, probation and parole supervision, violations and revocation decision-making, transition and reentry, and the management of justice-involved women and sex offenders. Becki holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Psychology and Sociology from LaSalle University in Philadelphia and a Master of Science degree in Criminology from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Our next panelist is Melissa Pearson, who is the Deputy Director of Justice Programs with the Franklin County Office of Justice Policy and Programs, or OJPP for short, in Ohio. She has served with this office for 18 years, including in previous roles with this same department as a Justice Program Evaluator and a Grants Administrator. Prior to her tenure with OJPP, Melissa was a Programs Manager with the Franklin County Common Pleas Adult Probation Department, and she's credited with launching the first day reporting program in Franklin County and overseeing a myriad of specialized probation caseloads. Melissa attended Ohio University for her undergraduate degree in Sociology and Criminology, and the University of Dayton, at the University of Dayton, and where she also obtained a Master's degree of Science in Education. In addition to her current employment, Melissa is an adjunct professor with Tiffin University and also provides peer review services for the Department of Justice. And our next presenter is Chief Deputy Jeffrey Stobart, who is the Chief Deputy of Research, Development, and Major Projects for the Franklin County Sheriff's Office in Columbus, Ohio. With a career spanning over 27 years, Chief Stobart has gained wide and deep experience within the Sheriff's Office. Prior to taking his current position, he managed the office's largest division and was responsible for the custody and care of more than 2,000 inmates in 2 jails and for the security of all individuals working and visiting in Franklin County government buildings. He has been assigned to every division of the office, spending time in patrol, community relations, internal affairs, and investigations. Chief Stobart obtained a graduate certificate in management development from the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University and is a graduate of Northwestern University's School of Police Staff and Command. He serves on the Franklin County Reentry Coalition and the Franklin County Criminal Justice Planning Board. And so I just want to say thank you very much to all of our presenters for joining us today on this training. So before we move forward with the overview, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items for the audience. Anytime during the webinar, you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A panel, which should be on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. This includes questions that are both content and technical related questions. so we will try to reply to technical questions in the chat window as we go. For the content-related questions, we're going to keep a running list, and we're going to address them all at the end of the webinar, or at least get through as many of the questions as possible, content-related questions as possible. During the webinar, if you encounter technical or audio problems, please call the WebEx technical support at 1-866-229-3239, and you should see this number we're going to chat it through the chat box right now, type it into the chat box right now so you can see that. Please understand that there are some technical issues that we may not be able to resolve, or even you may not be able to resolve with them on your end. For this reason, we are recording the webinar, and we will post it on our website at csgjusticecenter.org, and we should have the webinar posted online by the end of next week. Okay. And now I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, the mission is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. Specifically, BJA provides funding to support law enforcement, to combat violent and drug-related crime and combat victimization. Through the development and implementation of policy, services, and sound grants management, BJA strengthens the nation's criminal justice system and restores security in communities. So we're excited to host this field-wide webinar today, which again is funded through the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, or JMHCP, at BJA. Okay, and I'll also, just for those of you who may not be familiar, I'll provide a brief overview of the office where we work. I work, which is the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The Justice Center is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff here provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. And on this slide, very quickly, I'll just point to some of the publications that we've released out of the Justice Center. You can see that we have a variety of topics, including justice reinvestment, reentry and employment, and even up in the right-hand corner of your screen, a key publication called Adults with Behavioral Health Needs Under Correctional Supervision, which is also known as the Framework. And so all of these publications are available on our website, csgjusticecenter.org, and they are in the public domain, so we just encourage you to take a look at them if the topics interest you when you have the chance. Okay, and now I will turn things over to our first presenter, Becki Ney, for her presentation on systems change strategies. Becki?
Happy to be with you here today. I want to start the conversation by talking about some broader issues that might assist you in successful implementation of programming. So can we go to the next slide? Just briefly, I think many of you may be familiar with the National Resource Center on Justice-Involved Women. You may know that we pride ourselves on being able to take research and turn them into practical tools and tips for those of you who work with justice-involved women. We have a number of partners, and they are listed there. Next slide. There is our website address. If you've never been there, I encourage you to do so. We have a number of sort of written and electronic resources that you might find useful. You could sign up for our to receive newsletters and other kinds of alerts about training events and webinars. We are active on social media, and there I have listed just a few of the resources we have available to you. I might reference them as I talk about some of the system strategies that we're going to address today. Next slide. So just as a reminder, let's remind ourselves what it means to be gender responsive. So it means that we recognize that men are different from women. We recognize that the ways that they get involved in crime is different. We recognize that relationships are a critical issue for women and can be seen to be a contributor to their getting into crime, the kind of relationships they have with significant others and families, whether they may choose to be successful in treatment or not. But all this really means is let's just remind ourselves as we're talking about system issues that our goal is to see how gender responsive are we, not just in the program that we're creating for women, but how successful might we be in other parts of the system as well. Next slide. So, system issues. I recognize that it is challenging enough simply to implement a program. Many of the grantees of BJAs, whether it be justice reinvestment or behavioral health grants or any variety of things that you might be implementing at the very basic level, and I don't mean basic in an elementary way, but basic in terms of providing services and programs for women, can be very challenging. But I want to talk today a little bit about some of the higher level issues that can also make or break a program. So, for example, I've been involved with programs that are looking at reentry issues for women who may be coming out of prison or jail. And yes, there's a letter of support from the facility and from the Department of Corrections. We're gung-ho. Of course, we want women to be successful in reentry, and then we get the grant, and the community provider comes back and they want to get in, and lo and behold, formerly incarcerated individuals who may work for the program are not allowed to be in the facility. Or, we are not sure how best to do that. Or it could be dependent on the people who are staffing that day about your ability to get into the facility or not. So that's just one example, but there's other ways in which the system and the community can support or hamper your program. So, for example, if you're trying to take referrals from the judges or the prosecutor, and you have a prosecutor who really doesn't believe in anything other than punishment and incarceration, that might be difficult. Or if the judges are unaware of your program or not in agreement that women should be referred there, that could be a problem for you. And then what is the receptivity in the community? Because, of course, the women mostly are going to be living in a community. Your program's just one thing they have to do among a myriad of things. And so what are the other supports there? So that's just a little diagram about how I think about these issues and just want to address a couple of them. Next slide. So I always like to start with the end in mind. What are we trying to do with the program that we are running, that we are implementing? And always I think, of course, we want to have successful program outcomes, right? We want to show that we are reducing women's recidivism, not increasing it, or other outcomes that we may have derived. We may want to expand or sustain our program, especially if it's successful. But if nobody else knows about the program, or if other people aren't in support of it, that's going to be hard regardless of how successful you are. So let's remember not only to be gender responsive, but also think about sort of what are the outcomes we're striving for. Next slide. So one thing I always like to start with, especially the work I do with jurisdictions around program implementation, is to conduct an analysis of stakeholders. So who cares, right? Who in my community really cares if this program succeeds or not? Are there folks, as I mentioned earlier, whose participation or at least neutral presence is critically important, or it's going to tank our program? Are there folks who are actively going to be fighting against this program, who don't see it as an added value in the community? Are there natural allies? And sometimes natural allies may not be kind of the obvious folks you think about. I'm working in a community right now where actually it's the business community, surprisingly enough, who have become the natural allies of programs that we're implementing because they can see folks on the street, they can see homeless women, they can see children, and they know that what's good for that program is good for their business. So there might be natural allies in ways that you would not think of And then what are opportunities to engage them? So it's not sort of enough to identify, or who's, if you will, who's with me and who's against me, and how are we going to engage those who are with me so they understand fully what this program is and can represent it, or at least talk about it in a way that's useful with other folks that they may come in contact with. And then for those who may be against us, what are the things we might do to begin working with them in such a way that they might become neutral or even supportive. Next slide. Now, I know I'm not talking about things that are unfamiliar to you, and I assume you all think about these things every day and have considered some solutions that work best for you in this regard. So I would just encourage you, as we're going through some of these strategies, if you have had a successful strategy that you've employed that's engaged stakeholders broadly, it'd be great to know what those are. We'd like to keep track of them in the chat box and maybe even come back to them if we have time at the end. But think about inviting stakeholders to observe a program. Program graduations are often wonderful things. I have been to numerous drug court graduations, for example, and you don't walk away from those with a dry eye, and they're very impactful often to folks who really have no idea the kind of work that we do or how impactful programs can be to the clients that come through them. Consider, other ways to engage folks. Maybe you have a newsletter. Maybe there's an article. Maybe there's a local media type who's looking for something to write that might give you a paragraph in a kind of a local weekly paper. Consider an advisory group. Maybe some of you have already pulled advisory groups together or have a board of directors for the agency for which you work who might also be engaged in some way about the program that you are implementing and running, and they may take some initiative or responsibility as well for letting their colleagues know what's going on. Next one. So there are also some other tools, and these are just a couple. Again, I'm not going through an exhaustive list of things today, but there are all kinds of ways to engage both program staff, agency staff, the community, and other stakeholders in some meaningful ways. So a couple of them I'm going to just reference, the SWOT analysis, mapping, and the GRPPA. And I'll talk about what those mean as we go forward. So let's go to the next slide. A SWOT analysis, perhaps, again, some of you are familiar with this, and I know that Melissa will talk when she talks about the ways in which Franklin County has addressed some of these issues. I know she'll talk about having done a SWOT analysis, which is really, the initial strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So what are the strengths of your program? What are the opportunities? And you may look at this in terms of your program, in terms of your criminal justice system, in terms of your community, as it relates to helping justice-involved women to be successful. You might look at what are some of our challenges, the weaknesses and threats out there. Oftentimes, threats might include resources or staffing, or some major things happen in the community and everybody's attention now is turned to that, and this has become a lesser priority. But sometimes this can help you understand, kind of as a group or individuals or a community, what are the things that we have going for us that we should build upon and use well? And then how do we use those things to address some of our challenges and what we might see as some of the threats? So a SWOT analysis is a very simple thing. You can just Google it. There's tons of ways to engage this kind of an analysis as a way of looking at system issues. So what's our next one? Mapping. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this model, the INTERCEPT model of mapping, what's happening at various criminal justice decision points. I've often used this particular model to think about, so what's happening with women at each of these decision points? How gender responsive is law enforcement? What happens when there's an arrest and there are children in the car, for example? What's happening in court proceedings? Are women as able to get into treatment courts, for example, or other things, what's happening in the jail. A lot of the work I do in jails and certainly around money bail suggests that women often don't have the economic resources and might be held longer. Reentry issues, certainly what's happening on the reentry front and community corrections. So this is one way, again, as an educational tool and as a way of engaging with your stakeholders, or even just locally, where does my program fit into a larger system model? Where are the referrals going to come from? How do I begin to engage others so they know I'm around? So doing a map could be one way, again, of doing that as a SWOT analysis is. Next slide. And the GRPPA. The GRPPA is the Gender Responsive Policy and Practice Assessment. And there is a website address there. It was developed by the National Institute of Corrections. It is a self-assessment guide, if you will, that helps you understand how gender responsive your program may be, your system, your community. You can choose to use various components of the GRPPA or do the entire thing. It just sort of leads you to say, yes, we have that, or no, we don't, on all of the components or elements on the GRPPA, and then helps you sort of key in on what are those things where we think we could shore up or need to pay some attention because we're not quite as gender responsive in those respects as we are in others. So again, just another helpful structured tool for beginning a conversation, for doing education, for doing some self-assessment. Next slide. Collaborative partnerships. I learned long ago in criminal justice that we can't do this work alone. When I first started working in corrections, there were many of us who said, we only get in trouble when we go to the community because they don't want to hear about people who are involved in criminal justice. But we learned very quickly that we can't do this work very successfully without partners. We can't be all things to all people. So how do you have partnerships? And again, I'd love to hear from some of you about the ways in which you have developed partnerships that might be useful to the rest of the folks that are on the line. What agencies can help you? What agencies, again, are sort of natural allies? Are there things you are observing about the women who are your clients? For example, is it housing? Is it transportation? Are there things, say, outside of your program that the women really need help with that you just can't provide, but they're not going to be as successful in your program unless they are able to figure those things out? So consider who your partners could be and what they may bring to the table. And then whatever kinds of training you're doing, even if it's just internal to your own staff about the particular program, I always encourage agencies to invite others in for all or some part of the training that would be relevant to them. It's just a way I have observed over time that when we are in cross-training and we have others at the table and we're hearing things at the same time, it's very different than if we're doing individualized trainings in every individual agency as opposed to doing it for everyone. The conversations that people have, the ways in which they hear things, is just different. So I'm a huge advocate of cross-training and would encourage you to consider that as you might be doing training events. Next one. So here's just a couple of additional strategies. Again, you might have an advisory group, as I talked about earlier. You might consider putting a multidisciplinary team together, and that can be at a couple levels. It might be a stakeholder group, but you might also have a collaborative case management process. It is not that unusual these days, and I see it in many jurisdictions where I am providing assistance, where several agencies who have clients in common might come together on some kind of a regular basis, whether weekly, monthly, quarterly, to talk about the cases they have in common and to make sure they are sort of coordinating in a way that doesn't create unintended problems for the client and can certainly help all of them as they work together on a client. So consider the ways in which you are collaborating and if there are ways to shore that up. And capitalize on existing resources. I will tell you, it's never been the case in 40 years of working in criminal justice that I've gone into community and haven't been able to find more resources in the community than anybody thinks are there. So I think we just have to be thoughtful about what's really available in our community, and are there ways that we can sort of leverage partnerships in ways that just help everyone. Next one. Tell your story. So I know that if you have federal or other kinds of grants for your program, that you have some data requirements. So again, another opportunity for partnership. We may not have the ability to do research within our agencies. Many agencies do not. It can be a time-consuming thing just to collect the data and to look at it to see what it's telling you about your process and your outcomes. Perhaps there are opportunities to forge a partnership with a local university or a college or a technical school. I'm a big advocate of using interns for doing things like this. But think about how you can tell your story both sort of quantitatively, as I've just talked about it in terms of data, but think about how you can tell your story qualitatively as well. I will tell you there's nothing more impactful than having clients go to a legislative session or a county board session or a speaker at a conference to tell their story, and hopefully it's a success story. It's very impactful when you can put a personal spin on that, and they can tell you more clearly than we can what's been most valuable about the program and what they've gotten out of it. So consider all the ways in which you can tell your story and how you're using sort of information about your program in a very broad way to get the story out. Next slide. So again, maybe some of you have done these things or have some good suggestions, again, about ways in which you've been able to tell your story that have been successful. Sometimes you may develop a broader communications plan, and it might be about a broader issue of, working with women. Certainly doing education and training sessions and making people aware, holding educational meetings with your key constituents, particularly I would think with a county or a county board or a city council or a state legislature, if you're working in a large agency, with your agency leadership. And as I said before, and make sure to give women a voice. They will sell your program better than we can sell it. So think about all these ways. And I would just say one last thing about system strategies is to think about them at the same time that you're thinking about planning and implementing a program, so that they become part of your overall plan and you don't get stuck sort of halfway through implementing a plan and say, oh my gosh, we forgot to talk to Judge so-and-so, or we've just realized that this part of our program is not going to work because we haven't been communicating very well with other agencies. So just make that a part of your plan from the get-go, no matter how detailed or involved it is. Make it a part of your plan so that you aren't caught unaware and you've got strategies in place, or at least have talked about strategies that might help. Next. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, or back to Allison, I think.
Yes, it's Allison. Thank you so much, Becki. I really appreciate all of that useful information. And now we'll move to the next panelist. We'll turn it over to Melissa Pearson, who will tell us more about system engagement and change on the ground in Franklin County, Ohio. Melissa?
Well, thank you. I'm hopeful everyone can hear me okay. I want to thank Allison, Maria, and Becki for including me on the panel. The opportunity to speak with leaders of this caliber from the Council of State Governments, BJ, and of course Becki from the National Resource Center on Justice Involved Women is just absolutely incredible and very, very humbling. One of the benefits of getting to go behind Becki is that I get to incorporate some of her thoughts and examples into my presentation as it relates specifically here to our efforts in Franklin County. She's really a pioneer in terms of laying some of the groundwork for best practices in program sustainment. And it's my hope that my presentation can further illustrate and build upon the recommendations that she's just provided for us. And hopefully everyone will have access to her newly released resource guide. I believe that'll be released here soon by Allison and Becki. So for you and your listening pleasure, though, it also means I'm going to skip through some of the material I believe that Becki did just a phenomenal job covering. I'll be highlighting our Pathways to Women's Healthy Living program, which, for background information, was embedded into our local jail in 2016. We seeded it with an FY 2015 Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. You know, we've been fortunate enough to be able to sustain the program and actually even expand it. So I guess in some regards, we've done some things right, and I'll try to highlight those. Of course, we still have a lot to learn, and we still have some challenges that we're working through as well. And I think sometimes those are just as important to learn from as the things we've done well. I've built in 8 takeaways for your listening pleasure. So I will try to highlight what I kind of can see as the 8 biggest points. If you leave and you forget everything, hopefully these will be some of the things that stick around in your head. And they really just build upon what Becki has already talked to you about somewhat. Oops, sorry about that. I went backwards. Let's go forward. Okay, to give you a little perspective and a little context, Franklin County is the largest county in Ohio with approximately 1.3 million residents. Columbus is the capital city of Franklin County and recently has moved up from being the 15th largest city to the 13th. A lot of people don't think of Columbus, Ohio as this large urban area, but believe it or not, we are. We are not just known for cow tipping. Our current jail population bounces between 2,100 and 2,200, with between 300 and 350 females in our jail on any given day. Last year, we had 6,714 females booked into our jail, so a fairly sizable representation and growing every year. Similar to other jurisdictions, most of the females booked into our jail are for drug-related and or property-related crimes, with some few having a history of violent crime. So to give, again, a little bit more context, let me provide you with an overview of our program. It's what we call the Pathways to Women's Healthy Living program. As a result of a partnership with the Council of State Governments several years back, and hopefully everyone on this call is aware of the technical assistance they can provide because they were absolutely instrumental in helping us to launch our Pathways program. We were able to identify a significant population of females with a mental health disorder, and they were literally just churning in and out of our jail, but being released under no form of supervision. So really just being released out into our community with no assistance in terms of navigating the various social services, treatment services, job and family services. So we really wanted to focus on that target population that did not have a support system already in place. When we created the Pathways program, we started with the end in mind, and I think Becki really reiterated that. What do we really want to accomplish at the end of the day? We knew through the data collected through the Council of State Governments that 72% of the folks in our jail, probably very similar to the folks on this call, were dealing with a co-occurring disorder and or substance abuse disorder, and that on average, individuals with a mental health disorder in our jail were staying at least 11 days longer than their non-mental health counterparts. And not surprising to everyone is that our female population was surging disproportionately to that of the males, despite an overall population decrease in our jail. So the end goals were easy to determine right from the start. We wanted to reduce the length of stay disparity between those with and without a mental health disorder and reduce the overall recidivism rate by 30% by 2020. And these are the goals that kind of keep us focused. Before we decided what we wanted to do, we did take a step back and reviewed why we wanted to do it. Obvious reasons were social justice issues, reducing disparities, but we also knew behind 80% of the females in our target population pool were children. We know 80% of the females in our jail do have children. So narrowing our target population to females meant not only impacting them directly, but also their children. So the intergenerational impact was a strong deciding factor for us. So understanding the why of what you are doing and why you are doing it is tremendously helpful. And I say that because I think it helps when you're going through growing pains or any type of staffing issues or other normal day-to-day nuisances that crop up in any life cycle of a program. I'm a firm believer that our program took off at the right time and with the right people in place. Our county was one of the first around the country to sign on to the Stepping Up initiative in 2015, so implementation of the Pathways to Women's Healthy Living was just a natural extension of those efforts. And our commitment to working with individuals cycling through the jail with a mental illness was widely embraced by all key partners from jump. We partnered with the Sheriff's Office, who you're going to hear from next, the Columbus Police Department, our largest local police division, and a primary treatment provider to offer gender-responsive, still really only a concept back in 2016, believe it or not, evidence-based pre-release services inside the jail for females. Pathways is a little unique in that it's completely voluntary. Our females are not court-mandated to be part of the program, both pre-release nor post-release. So our ability to engage the females in an 8-week program and then ongoing post-release services required a program model that is truly strengths-based, interactive, and engaging in a non-confrontational but informative manner. We had to make it fun, or else we wouldn't have gotten the participation that we do get. Most importantly, though, it required the hiring of staff skilled in motivational interviewing, building rapport and credibility quickly, and compassionate, enthusiastic about working with our target population. We started off with 2 full-time, very dynamic and committed social workers, which was different from our agency, filled with all primarily criminologists. One of the two program facilitators has a lived experience, which includes both addiction and justice involvement, and we also contracted with a full-time case manager from a local mental health organization. And so this is where I need a little drum roll, please, because this is your first key takeaway from this presentation. And it really is about, it's really about not underestimating the importance of staff in your sustainability planning. You know, we all too often focus on financial sustainment, but staffing is a key ingredient too. For those of you who are familiar with Sheriff Peter Katusian out of Middlesex, Massachusetts, he made a statement once that really resounded with me and has stuck with me ever since. He said, you can have the most perfect system with the wrong people, and what you're attempting to do may or may not work. But alternatively, you can have a flawed system with the right people, and you can achieve amazing results. You know, I believe in the statement, lock, stock, and barrel. These programs are about people, and we can never forget that. We must invest in our rock stars and make sure they are applauded for the big and little wins, as they truly are the secret sauce that will keep your program sustained long after your program officials are gone, your local elected officials are gone, and maybe even your funding is gone. Boy, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards again. Maybe I should let you take over, Allison. Okay. So real quickly, this slide, I know that if you're hearing about our program, you probably want to know just a little bit more about it. It starts in the jail. It's an 8-week pre-release program. Again, it's voluntary. We are focusing on individuals that cycle continuously through the jail, literally rack up nights and nights upon nights and thousands upon dollars of jail bed nights that are charged, of course, to the county. We're targeting medium to high-risk females, and again, they must have a mental health diagnosis and or a co-occurring diagnosis. To meet the dosage needs of the target population, which again are mostly high or medium risk, we operate 4 days a week with 2 of those days dedicated to cognitive behavioral therapy using the Breaking the Cycle curriculum from the Change Company. 1 day is dedicated to pro-social activities like yoga and arts expression using the Peace Love curriculum. And 1 evening is focused on recovery management, which is facilitated by our evening peer support team. We've accepted 221 clients into the program. We've graduated 83 and completed 11 8-week cohorts. This program this photo that you're looking at right now just includes an overview of the Pathways philosophy, which the participants are required to learn and recite at the beginning of each meeting. This slide provides you with some of the written materials that we use, including the program curriculum and the various screening and assessment tools. It seems like we add a new screening tool to each cohort, but the value of screening and assessment, just really can't be overemphasized. So this just provides you with some of those tools that we feel are credible. I would say most of them you'll find on the SAMHSA registry list. So Again, using those credible tools are huge in terms of establishing credibility with your various programs. Post-release, again, it's all voluntary. Once the participants graduate from the pre-release program, they're able to request post-release services, which includes, but is not limited to, ongoing case management services, linkage with a CIT law enforcement officer, transitional housing assistance, transportation assistance, linkage to a peer support specialist, weekly recovery management meetings, and supportive services funding to secure birth certificates, state IDs, that kind of thing. We've been fortunate to receive a large supply of clothing and toiletry donations, so we opened a boutique within our office, and the ladies are able to visit the boutique once they've checked in with their Pathways team members. Because we have no legal authority over these participants or their participation, keeping them engaged is a constant challenge and struggle. So we're constantly trying to brainstorm ways to keep them coming back to see us. And so one of the ways we do that is we build in kind of an incentive model. What you're looking at on the screen is one of those incentives, or I guess you could call it a reward for active participation. We took our active participants to our Local Matters program and allowed them, along with their children, to participate in a cooking demonstration where they literally learned how to cook a meal for under $10, because most of our ladies are living on a rather restricted budget. And then they also got to leave that day with a bag of groceries so that they could go home and, again, prepare that same meal. And the reason I include this into you is because these are things we built in at little to no cost to our program or to the county. It's through donations from county partners that we've been able to do some pretty creative incentive opportunities. Some other things that we build into the incentive plan are baseball tickets. The county, and I'm sure this happens in many of your jurisdictions, has a set aside number of free tickets to any number of different engagements. So a lot of times it's just about asking, and we've gotten pretty good at asking. We ask for donations at every turn because what might not seem like a huge opportunity for us really is a huge opportunity for the ladies that we work with. So my big second takeaway for you regarding program sustainability is to think outside the box. You know, you don't have to just think of the financial and staffing. Think about all the different resources that are in your community and what you can tap into. You might be surprised by how many people that will say yes to your request for a donation. Once you have established your program, remember that establishing your own brand is really, really critical. People will start associating your brand with a quality product or service, and that oftentimes will open that door that much quicker for some of those donations or just, and that can be in the form of products, services, but also it can be financial donations. So here is an example of what our graduations look like, and I thought it was wonderful that Becki mentioned and highlighted how important inviting stakeholders to your graduations are. We found graduation attendance by our visitors to just be a tremendous opportunity to bring in the community, to bring them into our jail and actually see what it is we're doing. For a bit of context, if you look at this slide, I've got the cohort photo graduation from cohort 1. Very wonderful ceremony, but you can see there's more participants than there are actual outside visitors attending. Then you slide over to the right, and you can see each graduation as we get closer to it, to cohort 10, the graduation. We're now at a point where the number of visitors exceeds the actual number of participants graduating. And that's because our number of participants graduating, it hasn't declined, that's actually increased. It's because the hype and the momentum and the excitement around this program has individuals now asking us to attend the graduation. I believe our agency has been able, through that established credibility with the jail and through our credibility with our program, or through our business through our business leaders and our elected officials, we've made this a program that people, they don't cringe at being invited. They want to be there. They want to participate. They want to be part of the excitement. And I guarantee you, at the end of each one of these graduations, there is not a dry eye, like Becki mentioned. So this slide depicts the support of our program. I think many of you probably have programs where you can bring in the outside, bring them into your program, let them feel it, let them see it. Like anything new, a lot of times it starts off with a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. I guess I kind of equate it to a new bar or restaurant, and with time you kind of see that wane away. Don't let that happen. It doesn't have to happen. And we've seen with our program that momentum and hype has actually only grown. So we invite in law enforcement, we invite in elected officials, we invite in other program staff, we invite in the faith-based community. Anyone who wants to come in gets to come into our graduation. As long as they're vetted by the jail and approved for entrance, they get to come in and celebrate with us. They get to talk to the ladies, they get to hear from the ladies, and actually seeing the program up close and personal makes all the difference in the world. So takeaway number 3 is to engage stakeholders through inclusion. Let them get up close and personal. I cannot overemphasize the value of celebrating the wins like a graduation ceremony and pulling in as many key audiences as you can. So Becki mentioned doing a SWOT analysis, and I'm certainly not going to bore you by going through every single one of these, but this is something we do on a weekly basis. And it's not something formal necessarily, but it's something we're constantly looking at. You know, we need to know where we are today, where we want to be next year, and how are we going to get there. So this is a conversation that myself, my staff, and all the people supporting this program are constantly thinking about. So it's something that you don't want to wait till your annual planning meetings or your annual performance reviews. This is something you've got to be doing on almost a daily basis. We do this, and I think it's part of the reason why we have been able to secure the funding and support to take our pathways to a much larger version. We will be opening a mail version or launching a mail version of the Pathways program in February of 2019. We've been able to embed an MAT program inside the jail to support access to Vivitrol prior to release. We've expanded our peer support team to 4, and we'll probably expand that by the end of 2019 to roughly 10 peer support team members. And we're hopeful to launch a Pathways-specific dorm within the jail by the end of 2019. All this is possible because of the stakeholders we've been able to pull into our program model. Takeaway 4 is the value and necessity of regularly reviewing your SWOT analysis. And don't do it in your office by yourself. You've got to pull in your team. You've got to pull in the other stakeholders. Don't wait until the threats and the weaknesses become unmanageable and potentially sabotage the future of your program. You've got to plan forward. This goes into the next slide, which Becki mentioned, which was justice system mapping. Now, we have not done justice system mapping specific to the female population. I love that idea. I think we'll look into doing that possibly in 2019. But what we did do in 2018 is we brought in the Northeast Ohio Medical University Criminal Justice Coordinating Center of Excellence to provide justice system mapping for our county. Can't overemphasize the value of that exercise. The value of bringing 56 justice practitioners, elected officials, and local thought leaders to the table to talk about the various different intercepts can't be overstated. I would suggest that the process is even more valuable than the end result. I don't know about you, but looking at this screen kind of makes me dizzy. But I know that when we went through this process and the discussions that occurred and the different feedback that was provided between folks working at different intercept points was just, it just was an amazing experience. And I think everyone who sat in during that day-and-a-half process will say that they came out much more knowledgeable about all the other different systems and how they interact with one another within the entire justice flow. Another thing that we will be looking at in 2019 is conducting a gender-responsive assessment, and we will be using the exact one that Becki has talked about. So takeaway number 5 is to utilize all the amazing research that's coming out. I mean, every day, wonderful new research is coming out on gender responsiveness and trauma-informed practices. So take advantage of those. The tools available to monitor fidelity and evaluate gender responsiveness are just vast, and they really shouldn't be disregarded. We all know being gender responsive means creating an environment through site selection, staff selection, program development, content and material that reflects an understanding of the lives of the women we work with and responds to their strengths and challenges. And I think those nuggets right there are the same considerations you want to take into consideration when thinking about program sustainability. So, to the next slide. So I can't overemphasize enough making sure that you're not just thinking about your funding portfolio, but you're thinking about ways that you can cross-train with other systems, that you can diversify other things like your staffing protocols, reaching out to maybe other elected officials that aren't the normal ones that you usually go to. Reach out to those folks that can become your new allies. Don't just rely on one commissioner, one mayor. You just don't know what the future holds. So make sure you're really reaching out to a cross-representation of different champions that can really help you to move your program forward. This slide kind of tells you about the various different partnerships and direct supporters of our program. You can see we pull from a diverse group of partners. Michael's Craft Store is one that actually has donated to our Peace Love program. A local treatment provider has donated space so that we can hold weekly weekend recovery management groups. The Greater Columbus Arts Council has provided pizza and other refreshments for graduations. Columbus Police Department has donated CIT officers to attend our group and then be linked with the ladies upon release back into the community. And of course, the Council of State Governments has been instrumental in providing technical assistance to help us move the program forward from concept to reality with some true fidelity to evidence-based practices. We're very fortunate in our jurisdiction to be the agency that administers to the Franklin County Criminal Justice Planning Board. So for those of you that work in a local government, or you don't even need to be part of local government, really tap into your local coordinating councils if you have one. They are a natural ally. They want to see programs embedded that can have an impact. So really tap into those resources if you have them. And if you don't have a coordinating council, create one. So I'm getting close to the close, but I did want to emphasize the importance of building a communications plan. Again, this just reiterates what Becki said. My takeaway number 6 really talks about the necessity of your communications plan to keep your partners and future collaborators invested in your program's success. We're pretty lucky here locally, and especially in my agency, because my director, who happens to be Michael Daniels, he owned a newspaper for 12 years. And so he really understands the absolute value of telling your story and developing a brand. As you can see from this slide, our program is regularly highlighted in print media and local news clips. And this coverage really helps to build momentum, and it not only highlights the good work we're doing, but it's helpful in dispelling stereotypes and tearing down some of the stigma that often surrounds the justice-involved population. These are just people too, and that's what we're really trying to get across is the population we work with. And anytime we can highlight and make their situations more relatable, we think that's a win both for our program and for the public. Telling your story, again, 1,000 picture is worth 1,000 words, and when visitors come to our Pathways program space at the jail, their first reaction is often awe because our participants' artwork is displayed throughout the jail space that we offer the program in. It's also displayed throughout our office when visitors come into the office. And of course, it's a great icebreaker for introducing our Pathways program. The ladies have an opportunity to express themselves through our Peace Love program and of course create this amazing artwork. And you can see through this slide that each cohort, we take their artwork, and the art, it's not just the visual artwork, but they also create a spoken word through poetry. And we put those into a publication that we actually distribute to the ladies once they're released from jail. And then we also take out into the community when we do speaking engagements. And that really has been had a profound impact, not just on our ladies, but when the public sees this artwork, they're really astounded by how incredible it really is. So your takeaway number 7, and we're getting close to your last one, is to highlight your program in any way you can to as many different audiences as possible. The payoff and dividends may surprise you, as you never know who may step up to support your program, either through financial support, donations, volunteerism, advocacy, etc. My final slide for you today is, to me, the most profound one. This is Miss Stella, and Miss Stella is kind of what we would call our poster child, and she said we could call her that. Pictures are still worth 1,000 words, and a story can often tell us what facts and statistics never can, because they inspire and they motivate. And Miss Stella is one of those inspiring stories. Miss Stella had been in and out of jail more than 100 times, in and out of prison as well, 40 years in and out of various justice and mental health systems. She had literally accrued hundreds of arrests and thousands of dollars in jail bed nights. I am happy to say that she has been arrest-free since graduating from our program in August of 2016, is gainfully employed, in process of writing and publishing a book, and just signed on to her very first apartment. This is what it really is all about. And so making sure you're telling your program's story can't be overemphasized. With that said, there's still a lot of people out there, and I'm one of those, who wants to see the data. They want to hear the data. It's wonderful that you can tell a really compelling story. We definitely want to do that, but you've got to have the data behind you. So we want to make sure that we're not only sharing our stories, but that we're sharing the qualitative and quantitative data in a way that's easily comprehended and really speaks a story in and of itself. So you can see that what we calculate to demonstrate impact, we don't just look at recidivism, but we also are calculating jail bed nights, because we knew we wanted to get the folks with the mental illness diagnoses out of the jail. And I think you can tell, and this is a very early on study. I didn't get a chance to update this, and I do have that information if anyone would like to contact me for it. But I think you can see from this slide that the ladies we had in the program at that time, and at that time we'd only graduated 26 that had 1 year post-release experience, but they had accrued 2,425 bed nights, just those 26 ladies. After 1 year post-program, they'd only accrued 172 bed nights. So try to look at your data. How can you demonstrate and show it in a way that really speaks volumes to your decision makers, especially your financial decision makers and the folks that kind of carry the checkbooks around? So again, we're looking to appeal to different audiences to tell your story. You want to appeal to both left brain and right brain learners, because those are the ones that are going to make an investment in your program. With that said, I want to thank, again, the Council of State Governments and Becki's organization for including me to be on this. My 8 takeaways, hopefully you wrote them down. If not, I think the slides will be sent out soon. But with that said, I'm going to close and just tell everyone, wish you the best of luck and the happiest of holidays. Allison, back to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Melissa. We really appreciate all of that useful information, and I think we'll just transition right over to Chief Stobart. Chief?
I'm moving into position here. Give me just a second.
All right. Yes, we'll give you a second. Don't worry.
Obviously, you got to hear a great story about a great program that we're doing here in Franklin County, and we really couldn't be more proud of the work that's happening and the partnerships that are happening in Franklin County. And none of those partnerships would have been possible had it not been for the support that we've gotten throughout this process through technical assistance from not only CSG, but the National Institute of Corrections, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and many others. So we're very excited about that. First and probably most important is I'm kind of an old crusty jail commander. So the idea of the Pathways program when it was first brought to me was a little bit outside of the box. To understand where we're going, you have to understand a little bit about where we are today. Franklin County, Melissa gave you a little bit of the demographics. We're about 1.3 million. Our average daily jail population is around 2150. we have a capacity of about 2,330 beds between our two facilities. Our Franklin County Correction Center 1 is a smaller facility. It's roughly 643 beds. Of those beds, only 402 of those are actually rated beds. So the space is very limited. It's an old, antiquated, linear designed jail with little to no programming space anywhere within the facility. So the idea of doing these types of programs was a little bit outside of the box for us. We have to think a little bit differently than we had in the past. So it's been a difficult process for us to kind of get through the process of learning all of the positive things that came from this. We're changing a culture kind of here in Franklin County as much as we're changing a facility. And what you've asked us to talk about is the change of our two facilities. Our second facility, Franklin County Correction Center 2, or our Jackson Pike facility, is roughly 1,687 beds, with only about 1,044 of those being rated beds, what we consider to be rated beds, with enough space that's mandated by basically correctional best practices. Franklin County has about 43 cities and townships. There's 28 different law enforcement agencies that feed into our jail. We are the only game in town. Every arrest in Franklin County comes through the Franklin County jail. We have roughly 35,000 inmates that cycle through the doors of the Franklin County jail in any given year, so it's a very busy place. We average probably 80 to 100 fresh intakes a day, again with an average daily jail population of about 2,150. And to kind of understand where we're going, and what you've asked me to talk about a little bit today is the building of our new facility. We are in the process of building what we would consider to be, or what we hope to be, a state-of-the-art facility that truly facilitates programming, reentry, and we're housing inmates in an appropriate way to help with that cycle of recidivism that's occurring. Obviously, being the state capital, being a major college town, we have become the de facto mental health facility here, as well as the de facto drug and alcohol facility here. As I became the chief deputy here, I very quickly recognized that we were in trouble. Our facilities did not support this type of programming, this type of housing for our inmates. We very quickly reached out to the Council for State Governments, and as many of you may or may not know, we were blessed to be one of the pilot programs for the Stepping Up initiative. They came in, the Council of State Governments did a wonderful job stepping in, taking a very in-depth look at our data. They looked at our jail data, they looked at our alcohol, drug, and mental health board data, they looked at data from our hospital systems as well as our homeless shelters. They came out with a bunch of recommendations for us to try to tackle here in Franklin County and strategies for us, and one of those included the building of a new facility. We were very clearly not housing folks probably the way that we should be, especially those folks with mental illness. Our old, antiquated design did not allow us to do that. Because housing a mentally ill person behind a solid steel door for 23 hours a day, we all know, is certainly not the best way to treat a person in that situation. We know that they decompensate at a much higher rate. So we wanted to do a great deal of things in the physical design of the space to better house inmates, to better treat inmates, and to better deal with our mentally ill folks, especially those who had totally decompensated. The goals of our new facility were to create housing situations where if they were decompensated, we could quickly address that issue. We could quickly get them med compliant, quickly get them back on track, and as quickly as possible reintegrate them into general population. The new facility is going to be a direct supervision facility with inmate behavior management at its core. The restrictive housing is going to be more limited, and obviously with some new standards coming out from the American Correctional Association and best practices on restrictive housing, we wanted to limit that as much as possible. The mental health care here in Franklin County has been significantly increased. We're blessed to have commissioners who have been great partners with us through this process. We've greatly enhanced the amount of mental health care going on in our facilities. We now have basically 24/7 mental health care in both of our facilities. Substance abuse is a huge problem here. And one of the goals was for us to address from a physical plant, from a structure perspective on how to deal with that problem. As most of you know, Ohio, especially Central Ohio, Southern Ohio is kind of ground zero of the opioid epidemic. So you're welcome to the rest of you that are dealing with that problem. But we've dealt with this quite a bit. We're getting pretty good at it, which is why the medication-assisted treatment portions of what we're doing plays such a major role in the overall wellness process. One of the things that we definitely wanted to do was to become much more gender responsive, and we've been very blessed that through a lot of assistance from the National Institute of Corrections as part of our design process for building this new facility, we have been able to travel the country and literally look at jails all over the country. And one of the overwhelming things that we saw in our travels around the country was that women, especially within a jail setting, are kind of forgotten. One of the very first visits we did, and I'm not going to tell you what facility it was, but it was down in Texas. We went to what was a very nice, very modern, well-built facility, very well-run. We spent about 6 hours in that facility, looking through that facility, and after 6 hours, we hadn't seen a single female anywhere in the building. So we asked the question. Said, well, what's going on with where are your females? We haven't seen any females, is what we asked. And the jail commander kind of looked at me sideways and laughed and said, well, we knew you were going to ask that question. And he said, okay, come with me. And he took us down into the basement in a dungeon in the old part of the jail, and all of their females were being housed in that part of the jail. The women had been overlooked. In most jails, especially smaller jails, it's very difficult to properly classify women within a facility and house them appropriately within that space. So we made a very conscious effort and want to continue to make a very conscious effort to design a facility in a way that we can properly house especially our women in a gender-responsive and trauma-informed manner. To do that also means significantly increasing the amount of training for our staff. We've spent a great deal of time training our staff, especially on the mental health issues, and with CSG's help, as well as the National Institute of Corrections. On the mental health side, we have done a very good job of training our staff, significantly increasing the amount of training for our staff in reference to crisis intervention team training, specifically for jails, as well as some of the trauma-informed issues that go with that. So that has played a very large piece in what we're doing. And I don't want to take a bunch of time up. I want you guys to be able to answer questions or ask questions, because obviously Becki and Melissa have a lot of great information. But from a design perspective, what I can tell you, we are currently in the design phase of the continuation phase of our jail. Our jail is being built in phases. The female housing is in the continuation phase, and we're currently in the design process for that. What I can tell you is we have seen some decent examples of this around the country. Las Colinas and San Diego, women's facility in San Diego is a phenomenal example of some gender responsive design. With that design, what we're looking to do are things like a lot of additional natural light. There's having different gathering areas within the day space, different seating areas within the day space, so that we can create almost a therapeutic community type atmosphere, especially in those day rooms. What I can tell you is we've designed into every single pod, not just the female pods, but all pods, in our new jail, a classroom. So there is a classroom built into every single pod in our new facility so that we can bring programming directly into the pods so that we can, through risk and needs assessments, hopefully house people with like or similar risks and needs together so we can bring programming directly into the pods for those types of people or for whatever their issues may be. Things like Veterans Pod, AOD specific pods, and as Melissa, I'm sure, is whacking me on the shoulder here, she wants to obviously have a pathway specific pod. Sometimes that's a little bit difficult as a jail commander, and from a planning perspective, there may not be enough females actively involved in that pathways program to take up a full pod. But what we have created also in the housing areas are things we're calling neighborhoods right now, where we can put people who are like or similar situated based on risks and needs, or maybe parts of different programs in the same pod together, but actually their living spaces and some of their gathering spaces will be in these different and separate neighborhoods. Some of the other gender responsive things that they've done through the design, and this is really our architects as much as anything, a little bit softer furniture, color palettes, things of that nature. As you can see from the slide that's up, this is some pictures from the Las Colinas facility where they've put some what are basically big giant fatheads of some nature, some of that type of stuff in. As you can see, it looks more normalized. It's a more normalized housing environment for folks. So we think what we're trying to do is create an environment that's a little bit more conducive to learning, a little bit more conducive to programming. And, to be perfectly honest with you, this is outside of what a normal jail does. What I can tell you is that we're going to build a beautiful building, and it's going to be a nice building. And we're very excited about the building that we're getting ready to build. But what I can tell you, the thing that keeps me up at night is the change that's going to have to occur. Please remember, we're moving from a very old, very antiquated linear design jail to moving to a direct supervision facility where we're going to have staff embedded directly in the cells with the inmates. And while that may not be a new concept to many of you, that's a very new concept here in Franklin County. So that change management that has to occur, that change in philosophy and that change in culture are the things that keep us up at night. So those are the things that we are working very hard on now as the jail's being designed and as it's being built. We think it's very important to begin to train our staff now, not only in direct supervision, but all of these types of inmate behavior management, the gender responsive and trauma-informed care, so that the two things hopefully marry up when we occupy the new building. That is probably one of the bigger pieces of what we're doing kind of as a whole. We're visiting other jails, we're sending staff and embedding staff in other jails that we think are doing direct supervision and inmate behavior management well. So this has been a very long process for us. We've had a great deal of help. We certainly don't think that we have it all figured out. You got to hear a little bit about the Pathways program, but there are a lot of other great programs that are happening in our current facilities that we're doing as well, and we're very excited to be able to continue to do that. It's taken a long time for us to get here. It's taken a lot of work for us to get here. It's not an easy process, but what I can tell you is you heard both Becki and Melissa talk about having the right people in the right chairs to drive your process, and that has definitely happened here. We kind of have the perfect storm here in Franklin County where all of the partners that are attached to the criminal justice system here in Franklin County are moving in the same direction to include really all of the stakeholders as well as the funding sources. So we've been very blessed that not only to have the financial support, but the actual support and everyone moving in the same direction. That coupled with the help that we've received nationally from SAMHSA, the BJA, obviously CSG and the National Institute of Corrections has definitely driven our project forward. So again, we're certainly happy to take questions. I could probably talk about jail design all day long since this has become my full-time job, but we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to answer questions. And with that, Becki, I'll turn it back over to you. Or Allison, whoever's taken over.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
No, listen, this is Allison, and I just really have to say thank you so much to all of our panelists, Becki, Melissa, and Chief Stobart. We just had some really interesting information that you all provided today, so helpful, and just thank you for taking the time to be on the webinar today. And we will use the remaining time now for questions. And we have a lot coming in already, so we are going to aim to try to get through as many as we can. But just a reminder, you can continue to use the chat box on the lower right-hand corner of your screen to send us any questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can. So I'll direct, well, maybe this is less of a question, but more directed towards Becki. I'll start with some of the strategies. You mentioned a call out to ask about collaboration strategies, and a whole bunch came in. So I thought I might just read a sample of what the attendees listed as different entities that they collaborate with. Would that be useful, Becki? Or?
Terrific.
Sure. So we have from, and this is from multiple attendees, so thank you for sharing this information. So we have suggestions to engage mental health and substance use treatment providers, primary care partners, so I'm assuming that probably means medical or clinic partners, to engage them in treatment planning and also the ongoing work with the women, suggestions to engage courts, to collaborate with faith-based organizations and local religious leaders, to collaborate with the jails, with peer recovery centers, with what someone called DJFS, I'm assuming probably that's family services, housing coalitions, clinics, and specifically we had one Department of Corrections, Tennessee Department of Corrections on the webinar today, suggesting to partner with local universities, Department of Children's Services, the Department of Labor, and Workforce Development. So a lot of different collaborating partners. Becki.
That's fabulous. I'm glad to hear about some of those. Are there other, I mean, seems very consistent with the ways in which we were talking about it, and certainly the way in which Melissa has talked about building partnerships in Franklin County as well.
Are there any gaps there that you're thinking of off the top of your head to any of the panelists? Any other additional, partnerships you would encourage folks to cultivate?
Well, I especially, as I said in my presentation, especially like the collaborations with local universities to assist with research efforts. I especially like the collaborations with other service providers that can just sort of provide ancillary services that help our programs be more successful. So I just encourage you all to continue and to consider whether you have some gaps. It's hard to comment on whether there are gaps without knowing the programs quite specifically, but sure. It sounds like folks have paid some attention to these issues, and so that's very good to hear.
Great. Thank you so much. And here's a question. We have a lot of questions. Here's a question to Chief Stobart. Chief, what tools are you using to help identify veterans, specifically female veterans, in your facility?
So every single day, our jail management system, the way our jail management system is set up, we basically create a list every single day that's generated at intake of basically our daily intakes. That information is sent to the VRSS. The VRSS, within several hours of us sending them that list every single day, identifies the folks at intake that are veterans. And from there, basically we go into our classification system, identify them in our classification system as veterans, and the VRSOs, the veteran service officers, then come in and basically interview, connect those people to resources through the VA and other entities that are available here in Franklin County.
Thank you so much.
We're very close to starting a veterans pod. It's actually being renovated as we speak. So one of our goals here is to very quickly get a veteran-specific pod up and running, and hopefully within the next couple of weeks here, we should be able to push something out. And because we're going to tell our story, because Becki says I'm supposed to tell my story, that we've started this veterans pod, and where we'll bring services in directly to the pod and begin to model some of this behavior and some of this in-pod learning directly in our current physical plant and our current facilities, so that we're helping transition not only our staff but the inmates into what our new philosophy is going to be.
Thank you so much, Chief. And a quick follow-up question. People are asking just rough, approximately, how many people are housed in one pod together?
Our buildings are they're very broken up. They're very antiquated. At our main jail downtown, the largest pod would only have somewhere between, they vary. The largest one's probably 20. The smallest, obviously we have single cells, but the smaller pods are 8. In our Jackson Pike facility, which is our larger facility, they range everywhere from 14 to somewhere around 30.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief. And the next question, or a couple of questions I have for Melissa, if you're able to join on, Melissa. Some attendees would like to know, first of all, if you have any written guide or manuals on your program that can be used in terms of trying to recreate aspects of the Pathways program. And also specifically, they're asking if any piece of Pathways focuses on parenting skills at all.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say that I do have like a binder of how to set up a Pathways program. I don't have something quite that concise, but anything that anybody wants I can share, any of the tools we use. We wrote a grant application. Of course, what a grant application looks like and what a program ends up looking like are sometimes vastly different, and that is the case in this scenario as well. But I certainly welcome anyone to email me offline, and I will work with them to try to help give them kind of an idea of how we set it up. Again, we walked before we ran, so we started much smaller than where we are today, and so that's the number one takeaway. Regarding the parenting classes, yes, we are trying to incorporate in a new program once the folks are released from the jail setting. The jail does some parenting. Unfortunately, the jail isn't conducive for a ton more programming at this point until we get this new jail set up. With the ladies that we work with, we get them linked with any program that we can that offers some parenting programs. I'll be straight up and honest with you, a majority of the ladies we work with do not currently have custody of their children. They are working with a caseworker through our Franklin County Children's Services Board. So in those cases, while we provide support, we kind of let that caseworker do their thing and stay out of that part. But we do intend on offering some parenting classes here soon as part of our weekly recovery management offering that we do on Saturdays.
And on a side note, our social services within the jail also offers parenting classes. And one of the other things that we just started were quarterly, we're calling them workshops for lack of a better term, where we've partnered with the Franklin County Infant Mortality Task Force, where we're targeting parents with children 1 year old or younger to teach them some parenting skills, some coping skills, where our Child Infant Mortality Task Force and the partners here in Franklin County are actually coming into the jail once a quarter, basically, one for males, one for females, basically in the same space that we have our Pathways program in. You got to remember our facilities are really not set up for programming. There's no real programming space designed into either of our current facilities, so we basically took a gym and cut it in half and created some programming space, and we use that kind of for multiple classes right now. Obviously, Pathways being the predominant owner of that space, but we use it for many other things as well.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll just point to, we're going to take one or two more questions in the time that we have remaining, but I will just alert the attendees that we do have we're definitely not going to be able to, unfortunately, get through all of the questions. There were so many, which is great, but please reach out to us if your question was not answered, and we will do our best to respond to you. And so I'll just try to fit in a couple more questions here. You can see our email contacts on the screen. So a question, I don't know, certainly the Chief and Melissa can respond. Becki, you may have information to add too, but I'll start with the Chief and Melissa. So an attendee asked, do you have, with the desire to be gender responsive in their jurisdiction, they're asking about how you incorporate work with transgendered people, women, into your system, into your jail, and into the community work.
So we've actually done a lot of work on this issue. Franklin County, Columbus, has a very large LGBT community here. So we're very aware of these issues. One of the best things I think that we've done is through a partnership with the National Institute of Corrections, we created the jail-specific CIT training. As part of that training, our CIT officers and some of the scenarios that we set up for our CIT officers, we actually use transgendered actors as part of those scenarios. We partnered with our local Stonewall Union, who provides us with transgendered actors to do some of those scenarios with our staff. And then I think what's a more important piece of it is afterwards we do a panel. And we have a diversity panel that sits with our staff that are going through the crisis intervention team training, and it's a very open and honest dialogue that has occurred. The folks that have participated as actors sit on the panel, and there's a very open and honest dialogue that happens between them. They've done a great job of being open and answering questions for our staff, and just creating that awareness more than anything, I think has drastically changed the culture here in Franklin County. I think we've seen what we see from our staff. What I can tell you is with this training, our people have become much more, I don't want to say tolerant, but patient. Intake in a jail can be a very difficult place to work. It's, kind of a factory, like you're trying to hurry up and process people through. We don't have a great space to do that in now, so we're trying to kind of hurry through the process and get folks pushed up into housing. And what we've seen with this type of training and this type of interaction has been a much more patient and patient philosophy from our staff, which has had great results. The results for us, what that means for us is much less discipline within our jail, many less uses of force when our people are a little bit more patient, because they're a little bit more knowledgeable about not only transgendered issues, but mental health issues as well.
Thank you so much to, we're going to have to stop now. The discussion is just getting going, but I know that we had many questions today that we did not get to. I just encourage folks to please either email our panelists, or you can also email me. I'm Allison Upton at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I will definitely respond to your emails, requests, and questions. My email is aupton@csg.org. It's up on your screen, and I just want to thank very much all of our panelists today. Just such a very engaging webinar topic, and thanks to all of our attendees. And so we'll wrap it up for now. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.